Every night, my husband said he was helping our son with his work in the garage. At 2 a.m., I heard a loud thud and his voice whispering, "Don't let her find out." I hid and watched them load a heavy bag into the truck. When the bag opened, I froze when I saw what they had been hiding from me. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. I've always been a light sleeper. At 63, I suppose it comes with the territory. Worrying about everything from the water bill to whether I remembered to lock the front door. But that November night, something woke me that had nothing to do with my usual anxieties. The clock on my nightstand read 2:17 a.m. The house was silent except for the familiar creaking of old pipes and the wind pushing against the windows of our farmhouse in rural Pennsylvania. Gerald's side of the bed was empty, the sheets cool to the touch. I sat up, listening. Then I heard it, a muffled thud from the direction of the garage, followed by voices too low to distinguish words. My heart quickened. Gerald had been spending nearly every night out there for the past 3 weeks, claiming he was helping Benjamin with his work. Our son had moved back home 6 months ago, taking a position as assistant curator at the Whitmore County Museum of History, the same institution where Gerald had worked for 35 years before his retirement. I'd been pleased to see them growing closer. Father and son bent over documents and artifacts, speaking in hushed tones about preservation techniques and historical significance. But 2 a.m. seemed excessive, even for dedicated curators. I slipped out of bed, pulling on my robe. The hardwood floor was cold beneath my bare feet as I moved toward the hallway. Our farmhouse sat on 12 acres that had been in Gerald's family for generations, isolated enough that midnight sounds usually meant raccoons or the occasional deer. Human activity at this hour was unusual. I reached the mudroom that connected to the garage and pressed my ear against the door. Gerald's voice came through, strained and urgent. "Careful with that one. The frame's 18th century, irreplaceable." "I know, Dad. I cataloged it myself." Benjamin's voice sounded tense, frightened even. My hand moved toward the doorknob, but something stopped me. There was a quality to their conversation, secretive, anxious, that made me hesitate. Instead, I moved to the mudroom window, the one that looked out onto the side of the garage. The curtain was thin enough to see through if I stood at the right angle. The garage's side door was open, pale light spilling onto the gravel driveway. Gerald's truck was backed up close to the entrance, its tailgate down. As I watched, Benjamin emerged carrying a large canvas bag, the kind museums use for transporting delicate items. He was struggling with the weight. "Don't let her find out." Gerald's voice drifted through the night air, clear and sharp. "Not yet. Not until we understand what we're dealing with." I pressed myself against the wall, my breath catching. Her. He meant me. Benjamin hefted the bag into the truck bed, and for a moment, the canvas gaped open. Even from my position, I could see the gleam of gold leaf, the corner of an ornate frame, the edge of what looked like a colonial-era portrait. These weren't reproductions or study materials. These were genuine artifacts, museum pieces. My mind raced through possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. Gerald had never been anything but honest in our 42 years of marriage. He'd built his career on integrity, refusing promotions that would have taken him away from the actual work of preservation and curation. Benjamin had followed in his footsteps, earnest and dedicated, the kind of young man who still called me every Sunday even before he'd moved back home. But here they were, at 2 a.m., loading what appeared to be museum property into a truck. I watched as they made 3 more trips, each time carrying bags or carefully wrapped bundles. Gerald moved with the cautiousness of age, but also with purpose, checking the driveway, scanning the tree line. Benjamin kept glancing back at the house, his face pale in the garage light. "That's the last of them," Benjamin finally said, his voice carrying in the still night. "Where are we taking them?" "The old tobacco barn on the east property line. No one goes out there anymore. We'll need time to figure this out, to find out who's behind it." "What if she notices they're gone from the house?" "The house?" My whisper fogged the cold window glass. "She won't go into my study," Gerald replied. "I've kept it locked. We just need a few days to—" A phone rang, shrill and intrusive. Benjamin fumbled in his pocket, answered it quickly. Hello? His face changed, draining of what little color remained. Yes, I understand. Tomorrow morning? But yes. Yes, I'll be there. He ended the call and looked at Gerald with something close to panic. That was Director Whitmore. There's going to be an emergency inventory audit tomorrow. She said items have been reported missing. The word missing seemed to hang in the cold air between them. Gerald's response was swift. Then we move faster. Let's go now. Get these secured. We can be back before dawn. They climbed into the truck, and I watched the taillights disappear down our long driveway toward the eastern fields. My legs felt weak. I sank onto the mudroom bench, my mind churning through what I'd witnessed. Missing museum pieces, hidden in our home, now being moved to an abandoned barn on our property. The rational part of my brain insisted there had to be an explanation. Gerald wasn't a thief. Benjamin wasn't a criminal. But the evidence of my own eyes told a different story, and that phrase, "Don't let her find out," echoed in my thoughts. They were protecting me from something, or hiding something from me. I returned to bed but didn't sleep. When Gerald slipped back into the room an hour before dawn, I kept my breathing steady, my eyes closed, listening as he undressed quietly and eased himself under the covers. His hand reached out and rested gently on my shoulder, the way it had for 42 years. "I'm sorry, Anne," he whispered, so softly I almost didn't hear it. "I'm so sorry." When morning came, I made breakfast as usual. Eggs, toast, coffee, and watched my husband and son across the table. They looked exhausted, their eyes shadowed with sleeplessness and worry. Benjamin pushed his food around his plate while Gerald read the newspaper with unusual intensity, as if the local news about the county fair and high school football scores required his complete attention. "Everything all right?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "Fine," Gerald said too quickly. "Just tired." Benjamin and I were up late working on a catalog project. "Very late," I observed. "I barely heard you come to bed." His eyes met mine briefly, then slid away. "Important work. Deadline coming up." Benjamin excused himself, claiming he needed to get to the museum early. After he left, Gerald retreated to his study, the one I was apparently not supposed to enter, and closed the door firmly behind him. I stood in our kitchen, surrounded by the familiar comfort of 42 years of marriage, and felt completely alone. Whatever was happening, whatever danger or trouble my husband and son had fallen into, they'd decided I couldn't be trusted with the truth. That decision, more than anything else, frightened me. I waited until I heard Gerald's shower running, then moved quickly to his study. The door was locked, as Benjamin had mentioned. But I'd lived in this house for decades, and I knew every secret it held. The skeleton key hanging in the basement would open any original door in the farmhouse, including this one. My hand was on the doorknob, the key inserted, when I heard Gerald's phone ringing in the bedroom. I froze, listening as he answered. Director Whitmore. His voice was tense, formal. A pause. "Yes, I heard about the audit. Benjamin called me last night." Another pause, longer this time. "I understand your concerns, but I can assure you that neither Benjamin nor I would ever—" He stopped abruptly. When he spoke again, his voice was hard with anger I'd rarely heard from him. "That's a serious accusation. I've given 35 years to that institution. My reputation—" The conversation continued, but I'd heard enough. I turned the key and pushed open the study door. The room looked normal at first. Gerald's desk, his filing cabinets, his wall of reference books. Then I saw the empty spaces. The credenza where he'd kept his collection of antique maps was bare. The display case that had housed his personal acquisitions, a Civil War officer's sword, several pieces of pre-Columbian pottery, a collection of early American silver, stood empty, its glass shelves reflecting nothing but morning light. On the desk lay a manila folder. I opened it with trembling hands and found photographs, surveillance-style images of the museum's storage facility, timestamps visible in the corners. Someone had been watching, documenting movement in and out of secure areas. Several photographs showed Benjamin, his face clear despite the grainy quality, removing items from storage cabinets. At the bottom of the folder was a letter, typed on official museum letterhead but unsigned. These artifacts have been systematically removed from the museum's collection over the past 3 months. The evidence points to an inside operation. Without their immediate return and a full accounting, law enforcement will be notified. The reputation of the Whitmore County Museum, and all those connected to it, hangs in the balance. My hands shook as I read it twice, 3 times. Someone was framing them. Someone with access to the museum, with the ability to create false evidence, with a motive I couldn't yet fathom, and my husband and son, rather than coming to me for help, had decided to hide the stolen artifacts on our property. The shower stopped running. I heard Gerald's footsteps in the bedroom. Quickly, I returned the folder to the desk and slipped out of the study, locking the door behind me. As I descended the stairs, my mind was already working through the problem. I'd spent my career as a high school librarian, not as glamorous as museum curation, perhaps, but it had taught me research skills, attention to detail, and how to find information others wanted hidden. If someone was trying to destroy my family, they'd chosen the wrong woman to exclude from the fight. I would find out who was behind this. I would uncover the truth. And I would do it whether Gerald and Benjamin wanted my help or not. Because at 2 a.m. that morning, when I'd watched my husband and son loading stolen artifacts into a truck, they'd made a crucial mistake. They'd assumed that a 63-year-old woman, polite and sensible and kind, would be too trusting to question, too fragile to investigate, too conventional to take matters into her own hands. They didn't know me as well as they thought they did. The morning after my discovery, I drove into town with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. Gerald believed I was going to my weekly volunteer shift at the county library, a half-truth that sat uncomfortably in my chest. I was going to the library, but not to shelve books. Whitmore, Pennsylvania was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone else's business, which made secrets both easier and harder to keep. The museum sat on the town square, a restored Victorian mansion donated by the founding family in 1952. I'd been inside countless times for exhibitions and fundraisers, had smiled at Director Whitmore at community events, had watched Benjamin give tours to schoolchildren just last month. Now I studied it with different eyes. I parked 3 blocks away and walked past the museum twice, observing. Security cameras at the front entrance, a delivery entrance around back. Large windows on the first floor, smaller ones on the second where the administrative offices were located. Nothing seemed unusual, but then again, I didn't know what unusual would look like in this situation. At the library, I logged onto one of the public computers using a guest pass rather than my volunteer credentials, a small precaution that felt absurdly dramatic yet necessary. I started researching the Whitmore County Museum's recent history, staff changes, acquisitions, loans to other institutions. What I found was interesting. 6 months ago, just before Benjamin joined the staff, Director Elizabeth Whitmore had hired a new chief of security, Richard Sawyer, formerly with a private security firm in Philadelphia. His LinkedIn profile showed an impressive resume but mentioned nothing about museum experience. Strange choice for a small county institution. I was so absorbed in my research that I didn't notice someone behind me until a hand touched my shoulder. "Mrs. Hartley, what a surprise to see you here." I turned to find Diane Patterson, my daughter-in-law, looking down at me with her practiced smile. She'd married our older son, Tom, 15 years ago, and had made it her mission to manage everyone in the family with the efficiency of a corporate executive. Diane. I quickly closed the browser window, but not before her sharp eyes flickered to the screen. "Research project?" she asked, her tone light but her gaze calculating. "I thought you were just volunteering today. Just looking something up. How are the children?" "Wonderful. Tom's wonderful. Everything's wonderful." She pulled up a chair uninvited, settling in as if we'd planned this meeting. "Actually, I've been meaning to talk to you about Benjamin. Tom's worried about him." My hands stilled on the keyboard. "Oh? He's been acting strange lately, withdrawn. And all this time he's spending with Gerald." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Tom thinks something's wrong. Maybe financial trouble? You know how museum salaries are. If Benjamin needs help, we'd be happy to." "There's no trouble," I said firmly, perhaps too firmly. Benjamin is just focused on his work. Diane's eyes narrowed slightly. Mom, you can trust me. If something's going on, the family should know. Tom and I have resources, connections. We could help if there's a problem. The way she said problem made my skin crawl. Diane worked in real estate development and had a network of lawyers, accountants, and business associates she deployed like chess pieces. She'd been trying to convince Gerald to sell parts of our farmland for years, insisting we were sitting on a gold mine that should be properly leveraged. Huh? There's nothing to worry about, I repeated, gathering my purse. I should get going. Wait. Her hand closed on my wrist, gentle but insistent. I saw Benjamin yesterday at the museum. I was there for a Chamber of Commerce meeting. He looked terrified, Mom, like he was being confronted about something. And there were police officers in the building. My heart lurched. Police? 2 of them, talking to Director Whitmore in her office. The door was open briefly, and I heard them mention inventory discrepancies and internal investigation. She released my wrist and sat back, studying my face. You really don't know what's happening, do you? I stood, my mind racing. I need to go. Mom! Diane stood too, her voice taking on that reasonable tone she used when closing a difficult deal. If Benjamin is in trouble, if Gerald is covering for him, this could affect the whole family. Tom's partnership at his firm, my business reputation, even the kids. We have a right to know what we're dealing with. There's nothing to deal with. Then why were you researching the museum just now? Why did you close that window so quickly? She stepped closer, her perfume overpowering in the small library space. I'm on your side, but I can't help if you won't be honest with me. I walked away without answering, feeling her gaze boring into my back. In the parking lot, my hands shook as I unlocked my car. Diane had always been perceptive, ambitious, and utterly convinced that her way of handling problems was the only correct approach. If she decided Benjamin needed help, she'd steamroll over everyone's privacy and dignity to provide it. I drove home by a circuitous route, checking my rearview mirror more than necessary. The paranoia felt ridiculous, yet I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. At home, I found Gerald in the living room, staring out the window toward the eastern fields, where the old tobacco barn stood hidden among the trees. He turned when I entered, and the haunted look in his eyes nearly broke my resolve to investigate secretly. Anne. He crossed to me, taking my hands. We need to talk. Hope flared in my chest. Finally, he was going to trust me with the truth. I've decided to go see a lawyer, he continued, and the hope died. I think Benjamin and I need legal representation. There are accusations being made at the museum, completely false, but serious enough that we need to protect ourselves. What kind of accusations? He hesitated, weighing how much to tell me. Missing artifacts, items from the collection that can't be located. Director Whitmore seems to think Benjamin had something to do with it. And did he? Of course not. His denial was vehement, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine. Benjamin would never steal from the museum, neither would I. Someone's setting us up, but I don't know who or why. Then why not just go to the police? If you're innocent, because it's not that simple. He released my hands and paced to the window again. The evidence looks bad. Benjamin had access to the storage areas. He was working late nights, sometimes alone. His name is on the sign-in logs. Security footage shows him in restricted areas. What kind of security footage? Recordings from cameras Benjamin didn't even know existed. Someone installed additional surveillance without telling the staff. Watching, waiting for something they could use against him. A chill ran down my spine. This sounds like a setup, a deliberate frame job. Yes. He turned back to me, and I saw fear in his face. Raw, undisguised fear. And whoever's behind it is very thorough. They've thought of everything. Which is why I can't have you involved, Anne. I can't have you at risk. I'm already involved. I'm your wife, Benjamin's mother. You're also the person I need to protect most. He came close again, cupping my face in his hands. Promise me you'll stay out of this. Let me handle it with the lawyer, please. I looked into the eyes of the man I'd loved for 42 years and lied to him for the first time in our marriage. I promise. Relief washed over his features. Thank you. I have an appointment this afternoon with Harrison Mills, the attorney on Church Street. I'll know more after I talk to him. After Gerald left, I stood at that same window, staring at the eastern fields. Somewhere out there, in an old tobacco barn that should have been empty, sat artifacts worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Evidence that could send my husband and son to prison. Evidence that someone had very carefully planted. My phone rang. Benjamin calling. Mom. His voice was shaky, young-sounding in a way that reminded me of the little boy he'd once been. Can you come to the museum? I need you, please. What's wrong? They're searching my office, right now, with police present. Director Whitmore is treating me like a criminal, and Dad's not answering his phone, and I need someone here. Please. Every instinct screamed at me to go, to protect my child, but Gerald's warning echoed in my mind, along with Diane's calculating interest and the memory of those surveillance photographs. Benjamin, your father's with a lawyer right now. Harrison Mills. I don't need a lawyer, Mom. I haven't done anything wrong. His voice broke. I just need my mother. Is that too much to ask? The manipulation was obvious. The emotional pressure deliberate. Yet beneath it, I heard genuine fear. I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said. I arrived at the museum to find a police cruiser parked prominently in front. A statement more than a necessity. Inside, the normally quiet halls buzzed with tension. Staff members clustered in doorways, whispering. Visitors had been cleared out. I found Benjamin in his small office surrounded by 3 people. Director Whitmore, a police officer, and a man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as Richard Sawyer, head of security. Mrs. Hartley. Director Whitmore was a severe woman in her 50s, dressed in the kind of austere clothing that suggested old money and older values. Your son called you? That's unfortunate. This is an official investigation. Into what, exactly? I kept my voice level, polite, the tone that had served me well through decades of dealing with difficult parents and administrators. Missing property, valuable historical artifacts that were in our collection and are now unaccounted for. She gestured to Benjamin with barely concealed disdain. Your son was one of the last people to access our secure storage. Along with how many others? That's not relevant. It's extremely relevant, I interrupted, still polite but firm. If you're accusing my son of theft, I assume you have evidence beyond proximity? Richard Sawyer stepped forward, and I got my first good look at him. Mid-40s, military bearing, eyes that assessed and calculated. Mrs. Hartley, we have security footage, access logs, and testimony from other staff members. Your son's behavior has been suspicious for months. Suspicious how? Late nights alone in restricted areas, unusual interest in high-value items, refusal to follow new security protocols. He pulled out a tablet and showed me surveillance footage, grainy but clear enough. Benjamin entering a storage room. Benjamin emerging with a bag. Benjamin speaking to someone off camera. That's from last Tuesday, Sawyer said. The same day 3 colonial-era silver pieces disappeared from our collection. Benjamin's face was white. I was cataloging. That's my job. And I didn't take anything. Then where are the items? Whitmore demanded. They're not in storage. They're not in the display cases. They've vanished, and you were the last person to handle them. I studied the footage again, noting the timestamp, the camera angle. This camera, where is it positioned? Storage room C, northeast corner. And how long has it been installed there? Sawyer's expression didn't change. 4 months. Interesting. Benjamin has only worked here for 6 months. Did other staff members know about this camera? Security camera locations are confidential. So my son was being secretly recorded while doing his job, and now that footage is being used to accuse him of theft. I turned to the police officer, who'd been silent throughout. Officer, does this strike you as a proper investigation or a predetermined conclusion? The officer, a young man who looked uncomfortable with the whole situation, cleared his throat. Ma'am, we're just here to observe the evidence collection. No charges have been filed. Yet, Whitmore added coldly. My phone buzzed. A text from Diane. Just heard about the museum. Coming there now. Don't say anything without legal counsel. That was the last thing I needed. Benjamin, we're leaving, I said firmly. Director Whitmore, if you wish to continue this conversation, please contact our attorney, Harrison Mills. All further communication should go through him. Your son doesn't get to just walk away from this. He's not under arrest. He's not being detained. He's leaving with his mother. I took Benjamin's arm and steered him toward the door, my heart pounding but my face calm. Sawyer moved to block our path. Mrs. Hartley, I strongly advise you to reconsider. If Benjamin knows where those artifacts are, returning them now would be, my son doesn't have your artifacts. Someone is framing him, and I intend to find out who. A noble sentiment, Sawyer said, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. But you're a librarian, Mrs. Hartley. This is a criminal investigation involving valuable historical property. Perhaps you should leave it to the professionals. The dismissiveness in his tone ignited something in me. I stepped closer, meeting his eyes directly. I'm a 63-year-old woman who spent 40 years finding information people thought was lost. I've tracked down rare books, verified dubious sources, and solved research problems that stumped historians half my age. Don't underestimate me simply because I'm old and polite. For just a moment, something flickered in Sawyer's expression. Respect or concern, I couldn't tell which. We made it to the parking lot before Diane's Mercedes pulled in. She emerged like a general surveying a battlefield, phone already to her ear. Don't talk to her, Benjamin whispered urgently. Please, Mom. She'll make everything worse. But Diane was already bearing down on us, and in her wake, I saw Tom getting out of the passenger seat. Our older son, successful and sensible, who'd always played by every rule. Mom, Benjamin. Tom's face was grave. We need to have a family meeting. Now. All of us together. Tom, this isn't the time. I began. Dad's been arrested, he said quietly. The lawyer just called me. They found something in his truck during a traffic stop. Museum property. He's being charged with possession of stolen goods. The world tilted. Benjamin grabbed my arm to steady me. Where is he? I managed to ask. County jail. Bail hearing tomorrow morning. Tom's expression was a mixture of shock and disappointment. Mom? What's going on? What has Dad gotten himself into? What have you all been hiding from me? Behind him, Diane wore an expression of grim satisfaction, and I realized with absolute certainty that she'd had something to do with Gerald's arrest. She'd made calls, pulled strings, ensured that her definition of help would be impossible to refuse. My family was fracturing. My husband was in jail. My youngest son was terrified and accused. My oldest son looked at me like I'd betrayed him, and somewhere, someone was watching all of this unfold exactly as they'd planned, but they'd made one critical mistake. They'd assumed I'd break. The county jail smelled of disinfectant and despair. I sat across from Gerald in a small visiting room, separated by scratched plexiglass, speaking through a telephone that crackled with static. He looked older than he had yesterday morning, shoulders slumped, eyes red-rimmed, hands trembling as he picked up his phone receiver. They found 3 pieces in my truck, he said without preamble. Colonial silver. I didn't put them there, Anne. I swear to you. I know you didn't. I kept my voice steady, though my heart was breaking. Gerald, I need you to tell me the truth now. All of it. Where are the other artifacts? The ones I saw you and Benjamin loading that night? His face went pale. You saw? I saw everything. I heard you tell Benjamin not to let me find out. I know about the tobacco barn. I leaned closer to the glass. And I know someone is setting you both up. But I can't help if you keep lying to me. For a long moment, he just stared at me. Then his shoulders sagged in defeat. We were trying to protect them, he said quietly. About 2 months ago, Benjamin noticed discrepancies in the museum's inventory system. Items listed as on loan that had never left the building. Artifacts marked as in restoration that were actually still in storage. Someone was manipulating the records. Who? We didn't know. But Benjamin started documenting everything, cross-referencing the digital records with the physical inventory. That's when he discovered that several high-value pieces were missing, not just moved or mislabeled, but gone, and the records had been altered to hide their disappearance. My mind raced. So you took other artifacts to keep them safe? Only the most valuable ones. Things we knew would be targeted next. His voice cracked. We were going to go to the board of directors, present all our evidence, but then Benjamin got a threatening note. Typed, anonymous. It said if he reported what he'd found, he'd be blamed for all of it. The note included photographs of him alone in the storage rooms, taken from angles that made it look like he was stealing. Richard Sawyer's cameras. Gerald's eyes widened. You know about those? I'm learning quickly. I glanced at the guard by the door, then lowered my voice. Gerald, who hired Sawyer? When exactly did he come to the museum? Director Whitmore brought him in about 8 months ago. Said the museum needed better security after some break-in attempts in the area, but there hadn't been any break-ins. We all thought it was odd, but she's the director. We didn't question it. 8 months. 2 months before Benjamin was hired. Long enough to install hidden cameras, learn the system, identify what could be taken. The artifacts in the tobacco barn, I said. I need to know exactly what's there. Anne, no. If you're caught with them, I won't be caught. Give me the list. He hesitated, then recited from memory. 2 colonial portraits, 5 pieces of pre-revolutionary silver, a collection of Civil War correspondence, 3 pieces of Native American pottery, and a first edition of the Declaration of Independence. A printed copy from 1776, not the original, but still worth nearly $500,000. I felt dizzy. That's over $1 million in artifacts. At least. That's why we hid them. We knew whoever was behind this would escalate, would try to make it look like Benjamin had stolen them. We just needed time to figure out who and why. But they moved faster than you expected. They planted evidence in your truck. After my lawyer appointment yesterday, I stopped for gas. I was only inside the station for 5 minutes, but that must have been when they did it. Then, conveniently, I got pulled over 2 miles down the road for a broken tail light that wasn't broken when I left the house. Setup, I murmured. All of it carefully orchestrated. A guard announced that visiting time was ending. Gerald pressed his palm against the glass. Anne, promise me you'll stay away from this. Let the lawyer handle it. Please. I placed my hand opposite his, our palms separated by barriers we couldn't cross. I promise I'll be careful. It wasn't the promise he'd asked for, but it was the only one I could give. Outside, I found Tom waiting by my car, his expression stony. Diane stood beside him, arms crossed, looking like a prosecutor preparing her closing argument. Mom, we need to talk, Tom said. Somewhere private. Our house. I need to get home. This isn't optional. His tone had an edge I'd rarely heard from my older son. Either you come with us now and explain what's happening, or Diane and I will have to take steps to protect this family. Protect it from what? From whatever Dad and Benjamin have gotten involved in. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so like Gerald's it hurt. Mom, do you understand what's at stake? Dad's been arrested for possession of stolen property. Benjamin is under investigation. My firm handles county contracts. If there's a scandal, I could lose my partnership. Diane's investors are already nervous about family associations. So this is about your reputation? It's about survival. Tom's voice rose. It's about not letting Dad's mistakes destroy everything I've built. Everything we've all built. Diane placed a hand on his arm. Tom, your mother is in shock. She doesn't understand the legal implications. She turned to me with false sympathy. Mrs. Hartley, we want to help, but we need full transparency. If you know where other stolen items are located, you have a legal obligation to report them. Withholding that information makes you an accessory. The threat was clear and calculated. Tell us everything, or we'll make sure you're implicated too. I don't know what you're talking about, I said carefully. Don't lie to me. Tom's face flushed with anger. I drove past the old tobacco barn this morning. There are fresh tire tracks leading to it. Dad's truck. What's he hiding out there? My blood turned cold. You had no right. I had every right. This is family property, and if there's stolen property on it, we're all liable. He stepped closer, and I saw desperation in his eyes. Mom, I'm trying to save us. All of us. But you have to trust me. Tell me where the artifacts are, and I'll work with the prosecutors. We can make a deal, show cooperation, maybe get Dad's charges reduced. By throwing Benjamin under the bus? Benjamin made his choices. He's an adult. He knew what he was doing. He was trying to stop a theft, not commit one. Then let him prove it in court. Tom grabbed my shoulders, and I saw tears in his eyes now. Mom, please. I can't watch Dad go to prison. I can't watch our family fall apart. Let me fix this. Let me help. For a moment, I almost believed him, almost trusted that my responsible, practical older son could navigate us through this nightmare. Then I saw Diane behind him, phone in hand, already texting someone, and I knew. Whatever Tom's intentions, his wife had her own agenda. I pulled away from his grip. I need time to think. There is no time, Tom shouted. Don't you understand? The prosecutor is building a case. Every hour you wait makes it worse. I got into my car, locked the doors. Tom pounded on the window, but I started the engine and pulled away, watching him and Diane diminish in my rearview mirror. At home, I sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea I couldn't drink, trying to organize my thoughts. The pieces were there, scattered like a jigsaw puzzle dumped on a table. I just needed to fit them together. Richard Sawyer, hired 8 months ago by director Whitmore. Hidden cameras installed. Benjamin hired 6 months ago, given access to high-value storage areas. Someone altering inventory records, making items disappear while framing Benjamin for their theft. Gerald arrested with planted evidence. Tom and Diane pressuring me to reveal the hidden artifacts. What was I missing? My laptop sat on the kitchen table. I opened it and began searching, starting with director Elizabeth Whitmore's background. The museum's website listed her credentials. PhD in art history, 20 years at various institutions. Appointed director of Whitmore County Museum 5 years ago. But when I dug deeper, checking news archives and museum journals, I found something interesting. 3 years ago, Elizabeth Whitmore had been assistant director at a museum in Connecticut when several artifacts went missing. No charges were filed, no scandal reported, but she'd left that position abruptly. I searched for Richard Sawyer next. His LinkedIn profile was professional, impressive, but shallow. No recommendations, no connections to anyone in the museum field. I ran his name through every database I could access from the library's online resources. Nothing. It was as if Richard Sawyer had appeared fully formed 8 months ago with a perfect resume and no history. A fake identity? Or someone working very hard to hide his past? My phone rang. An unknown number. I answered cautiously. Mrs. Hartley. A woman's voice, nervous and young. This is Jennifer Reeves. I work at the museum. Worked with Benjamin. I need to talk to you, but not on the phone. Can you meet me? Where? The park near the old courthouse. 1 hour. Come alone, please. If anyone sees us together, I could lose my job. Or worse. She hung up before I could ask more questions. I should have told someone where I was going. Should have called Harrison Mills, the lawyer. Should have been sensible and safe. Instead, I grabbed my purse and headed out the door. The park was nearly empty on this gray November afternoon. I found Jennifer Reeves sitting on a bench near the fountain, clutching a coffee cup with both hands. She was maybe 25, with anxious eyes that darted around constantly. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat down. I didn't know who else to tell. Benjamin was always kind to me, helped me learn the cataloging system. I don't believe he's a thief. He's not, I said firmly. What do you know? I've been working late a lot, trying to get ready for my graduate school applications. 2 weeks ago, I was in the break room around midnight when I heard voices in Director Whitmore's office. The door was closed, but I could hear her talking to someone, arguing about money. What kind of money? She said something like, "The buyer is getting impatient. We need to move the rest before the audit." And then a man's voice, Mr. Sawyer, I think, said, "The Hartley kid is becoming a problem. We need to accelerate the timeline." My hands clenched. "Did you hear anything else?" Director Whitmore said, "Then plant what we need and call the police. Make it clean." After that, I heard footsteps, so I left quickly. I didn't want them to know I'd been listening. Jennifer's voice dropped to a whisper. "Mrs. Hartley, I think they're selling museum artifacts. Benjamin must have figured it out, so they're framing him. Huh, why not go to the police with this? Because I have no proof. It's my word against theirs. And Director Whitmore has connections all over the county. Her family donated the building. Half the board members are her relatives. She pulled a folded paper from her pocket. But I did copy this from Mr. Sawyer's desk calendar when he left his office unlocked. I thought maybe it would help. I unfolded the paper. It was a photocopy of a day planner page, dated 3 days from now. One entry stood out. Delivery, barn, 2 a.m., final collection, RB confirmed. The tobacco barn. They knew where Gerald had hidden the artifacts. Jennifer, you need to keep this information to yourself for now. It's too dangerous. I know. That's why I'm leaving town tonight. I have a cousin in Pittsburgh who can put me up while I figure out what to do. She stood, looking over her shoulder nervously. I hope this helps Benjamin. He deserves better than this. She hurried away, leaving me alone with a photocopy that proved conspiracy, but wouldn't be admissible in court without more context. I drove to the tobacco barn, parking a quarter mile away and walking through the woods. The old structure sagged with age but remained sound enough for storage. I found the door unlocked, just as Gerald had left it. Inside, carefully wrapped and cataloged on metal shelving, sat over $1 million in stolen artifacts. Evidence of a crime my husband and son hadn't committed, but couldn't prove they hadn't. I stood there in the dusty barn light, 63 years old and terrified, holding a piece of paper that connected Director Whitmore and Richard Sawyer to a theft they were pinning on my family. And I realized something that made my skin crawl. Tom had seen the tire tracks this morning. Diane had been texting frantically after our confrontation. If either of them had mentioned the barn to anyone, to a lawyer, to a prosecutor, to anyone trying to help, word could have reached Whitmore and Sawyer. My own family might have just told the criminals exactly where to find their prize. I had 3 days before they came to collect what they'd spent months stealing. 3 days to prove my family's innocence before everything Gerald and Benjamin had tried to protect was discovered in our barn, making them look guilty beyond any doubt. 3 days to outsmart people who'd orchestrated an elaborate frame job and had the resources of the entire county behind them. I pulled out my phone and took photographs of every artifact, every label, every detail. Then I called Harrison Mills. I need to meet with you, I said. Tonight. And I'm going to tell you things that will sound impossible, but I need you to believe me anyway. Mrs. Hartley, they're going to find the artifacts in 3 days. And when they do, they'll destroy my family. Unless I stop them first. I walked out of that barn a different woman than the one who'd entered. The polite, sensible, kind grandmother was still there. But now she wore her intelligence like armor and her age like a weapon, because they'd underestimated me for the last time. Harrison Mills listened to my story in his cramped office above the hardware store, his expression shifting from skepticism to alarm as I laid out the evidence. The photographs on my phone, Jennifer Reeves's testimony, the timeline of Sawyer's arrival and the thefts, the calendar entry showing the planned collection at the barn. When I finished, he set down his pen and looked at me with newfound respect. Mrs. Hartley, what you're describing is organized crime. Not just theft, conspiracy, evidence planting, possibly even connections to black market art dealers. He pulled off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. This is bigger than a county lawyer can handle. Then what do I do? The weight of the past 3 days pressed down on me. My husband is in jail. My son is being investigated. And in 2.5 days, they're going to discover $1 million in stolen artifacts on our property. We need federal involvement. The FBI handles art theft, which takes time we don't have. By the time they investigate, Gerald will have been charged, Benjamin will be arrested, and those artifacts will be sitting in our barn like a smoking gun. Mills leaned back in his chair, thinking. There might be another way. The state police have a fraud investigation unit. If we can convince them this is part of a larger pattern, they might move quickly. But we'd need more than Jennifer's testimony and a calendar entry. We'd need something concrete linking Whitmore and Sawyer to the actual thefts. What about the altered inventory records Benjamin found? Benjamin's computer access was revoked yesterday. Director Whitmore claimed it was standard procedure during an investigation, but it means we can't access his documentation. Mills tapped his pen against his desk. Unless Benjamin backed up his files somewhere. I thought of my son, meticulous and careful. He might have. I'll ask him. Do it carefully. They're watching him. Watching all of you. Mills pulled out a business card and wrote a number on the back. This is Detective Sarah Kowalski, State Police. She's good, honest, and she owes me a favor. If you can get me solid evidence, I'll bring her in. But, Mrs. Hartley, you need to be careful. These people have already shown they're willing to destroy your family. If they think you're a threat— He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I left his office as dusk settled over Whitmore, the streetlights flickering on one by one. My phone buzzed constantly. Tom calling, Diane texting, even Benjamin trying to reach me. I ignored them all until I reached my car. Only then did I see the envelope tucked under my windshield wiper. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a single photograph. Me, standing in the tobacco barn this afternoon, clearly visible through a gap in the walls. Below it, a typed message. You're making a mistake, Mrs. Hartley. What you found belongs to people who don't like interference. Walk away, let the justice system handle your family's crimes, and you'll be left alone. Keep investigating, and you'll discover that accidents happen to elderly women, especially ones who wander into places they shouldn't be. I got into my car and locked the doors, my breath coming fast and shallow. They'd been watching me, following me. They knew everything I'd done today. The phone rang, an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Mrs. Hartley. Richard Sawyer's voice was smooth, almost friendly. I hope you received our message. How did you get my number? I'm head of security at a museum. Getting information is part of my job. A pause. You seem like an intelligent woman. Surely you understand that your husband and son are guilty. The evidence is overwhelming. Why destroy yourself trying to prove otherwise? Because they're innocent, and you know it. He laughed softly. Innocent? Mrs. Hartley, there are over $1 million in artifacts sitting in a barn on your property. Your husband's fingerprints are all over them. Your son's access codes were used to remove them from the museum. How exactly do you plan to explain that? The same way I'll explain how you and Director Whitmore have been systematically looting the museum for months. The silence that followed was heavy with menace. That's a serious accusation, Sawyer said finally. One you can't possibly prove. Can't I? I'm a librarian, Mr. Sawyer. I'm very good at research, at finding patterns, at uncovering things people want hidden. I forced confidence into my voice I didn't entirely feel. Did you know that Elizabeth Whitmore left her last position under suspicious circumstances? Or that Richard Sawyer didn't exist before 8 months ago? At least not with the background you claim. Another pause. You're bluffing. Am I? Then why are you calling to threaten me? Why leave a note on my car? If you're so confident in your frame job, why do you care what a 63-year-old librarian thinks? Because you're a complication. One we'd prefer to resolve peacefully. His voice hardened. But we're prepared to resolve it other ways if necessary. Consider this carefully, Mrs. Hartley. Gerald could get 10 years in federal prison. Benjamin could lose any hope of a career. But if you cooperate, if you convince them both to plead guilty to reduced charges, we can arrange a deal. 5 years, maybe less with good behavior. In exchange for what? Their silence, and yours. No wild theories about conspiracies. No accusations against respected members of the community. They serve their time quietly, and when they're released, you're all left alone to rebuild your lives. The calculated cruelty of it took my breath away. You want them to confess to crimes they didn't commit. I want everyone to accept reality and move on. Your family made mistakes. They got caught. End of story. No. The word came out stronger than I expected. No deal. No false confessions. We're going to fight this. Then you're condemning them to much worse. And yourself, too. Sawyer's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Old farmhouses burn so easily, Mrs. Hartley. Especially ones with faulty wiring. It would be tragic. The elderly widow, overcome by grief about her husband's arrest, falls asleep with a candle burning. These accidents happen more often than you'd think. The line went dead. I sat in my car, shaking with fear and fury. They'd threatened to kill me, openly, directly, without hesitation, which meant they were desperate, which meant I was getting close to something they couldn't afford to have exposed. My phone buzzed again. This time I answered. "Mom?" Benjamin's voice was tight with panic. "Where are you? Don't go home. They've gotten a warrant to search the house and property. They're at the farm right now." "What? On what grounds?" "Anonymous tip about stolen property on the premises. Tom told them about the tobacco barn, Mom. He told them everything." The betrayal hit like a physical blow. My own son had handed them exactly what they needed. "Benjamin, did you back up your documentation? The inventory discrepancies you found?" "Yes, on a flash drive. It's hidden in—" He stopped abruptly. "Mom, I can't say over the phone. They could be listening. Then tell me in person. Where are you?" "The public library. I've been staying away from my apartment. I think someone's been going through my things. Can you meet me here?" 20 minutes. I drove through darkening streets, checking my mirrors constantly. The library was closing when I arrived, but Benjamin was waiting by the back entrance. He looked haunted, unshaven, exhausted, wearing the same clothes he'd had on yesterday. "I'm sorry," he said immediately, "for all of this, for getting Dad involved, for bringing this down on our family." "Stop." I pulled him into a hug. This boy who'd grown into a man while I wasn't looking. "This isn't your fault. You tried to stop a crime. That's nothing to apologize for." He pulled back, wiping his eyes. "Tom called me this morning, said he was trying to help, that if I told the prosecutors where the artifacts were, they'd go easy on Dad. I told him I didn't know what he was talking about, but he didn't believe me. He said—" Benjamin's voice broke. "He said I was destroying the family out of stubbornness, that I should think about someone other than myself for once. Tom is scared and listening to the wrong people. He's right, though. This is destroying everyone." Benjamin pulled a flash drive from his pocket. "Everything I found is on here. Transaction records, inventory reports, security footage, timestamps. All the discrepancies that prove someone was systematically looting the museum. But Mom, if I turn this over, they'll say I fabricated it, that I'm creating fake evidence to cover my guilt. But I took the drive, holding it like the precious weapon it was. Not if we have someone else verify it, someone with no connection to our family. Who? I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out." I met his eyes. "Benjamin, they threatened me tonight. Told me to stop investigating or face consequences. Which means we're close to something they can't let us find. Then maybe we should stop. Maybe it's not worth it if— If what? If I get hurt? If we all get hurt?" I gripped his shoulders. "Listen to me. These people are criminals. They're stealing history, destroying your father's reputation, and tearing our family apart. If we stop now, they win. They get away with everything, and Gerald goes to prison for their crimes. Is that what you want? No. But I don't want you dead either. I'm not going to die. I'm going to be smart, strategic, patient." I smiled grimly. "I'm 63 years old. I've raised 2 sons, survived 42 years of marriage, run a library through 3 budget crises, and dealt with more difficult people than you can imagine. I'm not about to let some criminals intimidate me into surrender." Benjamin almost smiled. "When you put it that way. Besides, they made a critical mistake. They assumed I'd be easy to frighten, that I'd fold under pressure like some helpless old woman." I tucked the flash drive into my purse. "They don't know me very well." We were walking to our cars when headlights swept across the parking lot. A county sheriff's vehicle pulled in, blocking the exit. 2 deputies got out, hands resting on their belts. "Benjamin Hartley," the taller one called. "We need you to come with us." "On what charge?" I demanded. "We have a warrant for your arrest on suspicion of theft and evidence tampering connected to the museum case." "That's absurd. He's been here the whole time." "Ma'am, step back." The deputy's hand moved closer to his weapon. "Benjamin, turn around and put your hands behind your back." Benjamin looked at me with desperation. "Mom, do what they say," I told him. "Don't resist. I'll call Harrison Mills. We'll get this sorted out. But I knew as they handcuffed my son and put him in the back of their cruiser that this was no coincidence. Someone had called in a false report, orchestrated this arrest at precisely the moment when Benjamin and I were meeting. They'd been watching, listening, planning. As the sheriff's car pulled away, another vehicle approached, Diane's Mercedes. She got out, looking every inch the concerned family member. "I heard about the arrest warrant," she said. "Such terrible timing, but perhaps it's for the best. Benjamin needs to accept responsibility before this gets any worse." "You called them," I said quietly. "You told them Benjamin was here." "I'm trying to save this family, Mom, even if you can't see that." She stepped closer, her voice dropping. "Tom and I have been talking to a prosecutor. We can make a deal. Full cooperation in exchange for reduced sentences. But it requires everyone to be on the same page, including you." "Meaning what?" "Meaning you stop this amateur detective routine. You accept that Gerald and Benjamin made mistakes. You help them take responsibility. And in return, our family survives this with minimal damage." Her eyes were hard. "Or you keep fighting, and you watch Gerald die in prison while Benjamin spends the best years of his life behind bars. Your choice." She got back in her car and drove away, leaving me standing alone in the darkening parking lot with a flash drive full of evidence I couldn't use and a family that had turned against itself. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "The barn. Tomorrow night. Final warning." I looked at that message for a long time, weighing my options. They wanted me scared. Wanted me to give up, to accept their version of reality, to let my husband and son take the blame for crimes they didn't commit. But I'd spent a lifetime being underestimated, being dismissed as just a librarian, just a wife, just a mother, being seen as too old, too conventional, too fragile to be a real threat. It was time to show them exactly how wrong they were. I spent that night preparing. Not sleeping, not panicking, preparing. In my kitchen, I laid out everything I knew. The flash drive with Benjamin's documentation, Jennifer Reeves' testimony about the overheard conversation, the photocopy of Sawyer's calendar, my photographs of the artifacts in the barn, records of Elizabeth Whitmore's suspicious departure from her previous position, and the threatening note left on my windshield. Separately, none of it was enough. Together, it told a story, but one that prosecutors might dismiss as the desperate invention of a guilty family. I needed something irrefutable, something that would force everyone to see the truth. At 3 a.m, I finally understood what I had to do. Harrison Mills answered his phone on the 4th ring, groggy and confused. "Mrs. Hartley? It's the middle of the night. I need Detective Kowalski's number. Now." Something in my tone must have convinced him. He gave me the number without argument. Detective Sarah Kowalski was more alert, her voice crisp and professional. "This is about the Whitmore Museum case? It's about a conspiracy to steal over $1 million in artifacts and frame my family for it. And I can prove it, but I need your help. Tonight. That's a serious allegation. I have documentation, witness testimony, evidence of threats against my life. And I know when and where the real thieves are planning to collect their stolen goods." I took a breath. "But if we wait for warrants and official procedures, they'll disappear and my family will take the fall. I need you to trust me for the next 24 hours. There was a long pause. "Tell me everything." I did. Every detail, every piece of evidence, every threat. When I finished, Kowalski was silent for a moment. "If you're wrong about this, Mrs. Hartley, you could be charged with obstruction, filing false reports, even conspiracy yourself." "I know. And if you're right, you've put yourself in serious danger." "I know that too." Another pause. "What do you need from me?" Relief flooded through me. "Officers watching the barn tomorrow night. Hidden, ready to record everything. And someone to verify Benjamin's documentation independently. Someone who can't be accused of bias. I can arrange that. But Mrs. Hartley, you need to stay away from the barn tomorrow. Let us handle it." "I will," I lied. Because I knew something Kowalski didn't. Something I hadn't told Harrison Mills or anyone else. The people coming to the barn weren't just coming to collect stolen artifacts. They were coming to plant final evidence. evidence that would seal Gerald and Benjamin's fate beyond any doubt. And I was going to make sure the only people caught that night were the guilty ones. The next morning, I visited Gerald in jail. He looked worse than before, thinner, older, beaten down by circumstances he couldn't control. Anne. He pressed his palm against the glass barrier. Tom came to see me yesterday. He wants me to take a plea deal. Absolutely not. 5 years instead of 20. He says it's the best we can hope for, that the evidence against us is too strong. The evidence is fabricated and I can prove it. I leaned forward. Gerald, I need you to trust me. Trust that I know what I'm doing. Can you do that? He searched my face, seeing something there that made him sit back slowly. What are you planning? Something that will end this. One way or another. I pulled out a letter I'd written early that morning. If something happens to me, give this to Harrison Mills. It explains everything. Anne, no. Whatever you're thinking, I'm thinking that I'm tired of being dismissed. Tired of being seen as helpless. Tired of watching criminals destroy my family while everyone tells me to accept it. My voice was steady, calm. I'm 63 years old. I've lived a good life, but I'm not ready to surrender the people I love without a fight. I can't lose you. You won't. I smiled at him, this man I'd loved for 42 years. But if you do, know that I chose this, that I went into it with my eyes open, fighting for something that mattered. The guard announced the end of visiting hours. Gerald stood slowly, his hand still pressed against the glass. I love you, he said. I know. Outside the jail, I found Tom waiting by my car. He looked haggard, torn between loyalty and fear. Mom, please, just talk to Dad. Convince him to take the deal. 5 years. We can survive 5 years. But if this goes to trial and he's convicted, it could be 20 or more. Your father is innocent. The evidence says otherwise. Mom, I've seen it. The prosecutor showed me everything. It's overwhelming. Dad's fingerprints on stolen artifacts. Benjamin's access codes used to remove them. Security footage showing both of them in restricted areas. Anonymous testimony from museum staff. He grabbed my arms desperately. We can't win this. The best we can do is minimize the damage. Tom, what if I told you the evidence was planted? That there's a conspiracy? Stop. He released me, stepping back. Just stop. I've heard enough conspiracy theories from Benjamin, from you, from people who can't accept that the people they love made mistakes. His voice cracked. Dad wasn't perfect, Mom. Neither is Benjamin. Maybe they thought they were doing the right thing, protecting artifacts or documenting theft, but they broke the law. And now they have to pay for it. You really believe that? I have to believe something that makes sense. Because the alternative, that some elaborate plot exists to frame our family, is too terrible to accept. He looked at me with something like pity. You're not thinking clearly. The stress, Dad's arrest, everything that's happened, it's affecting your judgment. Or maybe it's clarified my judgment. I got into my car. Tom, if you love your father and brother, stay away from the farm tonight. Don't come out there. Don't call anyone. Just stay away. Why? What's happening tonight? Justice, I hope. I drove away before he could ask more questions, watching in my rearview mirror as he stood in the parking lot, phone already to his ear, calling Diane, or the prosecutor, or someone else who would make everything more complicated. But it didn't matter now. The pieces were in motion. At home, I loaded supplies into my car, a flashlight, my phone fully charged, a small digital recorder I'd borrowed from the library, and warm clothes. The November night would be cold. At 7 o'clock, Detective Kowalski called. We've reviewed Benjamin's documentation, she said. It's compelling. The discrepancies are real, and they follow a pattern consistent with systematic theft. We're taking this seriously. The barn. We'll have plainclothes officers in position by 10 p.m., recording equipment, backup units nearby. If anyone shows up to collect those artifacts, we'll have them on camera and on record. She paused. Mrs. Hartley, I meant what I said. Stay away tonight. Let us do our job. Of course. I hung up and finished my preparations. At 9:30, I drove to the farm by a back route, parking deep in the woods a quarter mile from the tobacco barn. I walked the rest of the way in darkness, my flashlight off, moving carefully through trees I'd known since I was a young bride. The barn loomed ahead, dark and silent. I found a position 50 yards away, hidden behind a fallen oak, with a clear view of the entrance. And I waited. At 10:15, I saw movement. Figures approaching from the opposite direction, staying low, moving with professional caution. Detective Kowalski's people, taking their positions. At 11:30, headlights appeared on the access road. A van, driving without haste, as if the people inside had every right to be there. The van stopped near the barn. 2 figures got out, Richard Sawyer and Elizabeth Whitmore. But there was a third person emerging from the passenger side. Someone I recognized with shock and heartbreak. Diane. My daughter-in-law walked to the barn door with Sawyer and Whitmore as if she belonged there, speaking to them in low tones I couldn't hear from my position. I pulled out my recorder, pressed record, and moved closer. "Should be quick," Whitmore was saying. "The Hartley woman has been neutralized. Her son is in jail. Her husband is broken, and she's too frightened to interfere." "You're sure?" That was Diane's voice, cold and calculating. She seemed stubborn when I talked to her. "She's an old woman playing detective," Sawyer said dismissively. "Even if she found something, who would believe her? We have law enforcement, prosecutors, half the county board on our side." "And after tonight?" Diane asked. "After tonight, we load everything into the van, transport it to our buyer, and collect the final payment." Whitmore's voice carried satisfaction. $2 million split 3 ways, worth every moment of planning. "What about the Hartleys?" "They'll be convicted. Gerald will die in prison. Benjamin will lose decades of his life, and their crusading mother will spend her remaining years knowing she failed to save them." Sawyer pulled open the barn door. Poetic, really. I recorded every word, my hands steady despite the fury building inside me. They went into the barn. I heard exclamations as they examined the artifacts, their voices echoing in the empty space. "Beautiful work," Whitmore said. "The old man knew what he was taking. These pieces alone will cover our expenses for the past year." "What about the first edition declaration?" Diane asked. "That was supposed to be the centerpiece. Hidden separately. We'll retrieve it last. Maximum security until the buyer can transport it properly." I kept recording, documenting every admission, every detail. Then I heard new sounds. Footsteps. Multiple people approaching quickly. "State police. Hands where we can see them." Detective Kowalski's voice cut through the night. Flashlights blazed. Officers swarmed from positions I hadn't even known they occupied. Inside the barn, there was shouting, confusion. Sawyer trying to run and being tackled by 2 officers. Whitmore demanding her lawyer. Diane screaming that this was a mistake, that she had diplomatic immunity, that her husband was a partner at a prestigious firm. I stood from my hiding place and walked toward the barn, my recorder still running. Kowalski saw me first. "Mrs. Hartley, I thought I told you to stay away." "You did." I didn't listen. I held up the recorder, but I got their full confession. All 3 of them admitting to the theft, the frame job, and their plans to let my husband and son go to prison. Kowalski took the recorder, listened briefly, and smiled. "This is gold. Combined with Benjamin's documentation and what we just witnessed, we have them cold." "All 3? I looked at Diane being handcuffed, her face contorted with rage and disbelief. "All 3. Conspiracy to commit theft, fraud, evidence tampering, and attempted obstruction of justice." Kowalski studied me with respect. "You took a serious risk coming here tonight." "I had to. For my family. Your family is lucky to have you." As officers led the prisoners away, Diane caught sight of me. Her expression transformed from rage to something like hatred. "You've destroyed everything," she screamed. "Tom's career, our family's reputation, our future. Because you couldn't accept reality." "No," I said quietly. "I destroyed your criminal conspiracy. There's a difference." Tom arrived as they were loading Diane into a police car, his face white with shock. He stared at his wife, then at me, unable to process what he was seeing. "Mom? What is this?" "The truth, Tom. The truth you didn't want to see." The bail hearing the next morning was brief. With Sawyer, Whitmore, and Diane in custody, and with Detective Kowalski's testimony about the recorded confessions and verified documentation, the charges against Gerald and Benjamin were dropped immediately. I stood in the courtroom gallery as my husband and son were released, watching Gerald's face transform from despair to disbelief to overwhelming relief. Benjamin wept openly. Even the judge, a stern woman in her 50s, smiled as she signed the dismissal papers. The court apologizes to Mr. Hartley and Mr. Benjamin Hartley for the ordeal they've endured, she said. It's clear that they were victims of an elaborate criminal conspiracy. All records of these charges will be expunged. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed with questions. How had we known? Who had uncovered the conspiracy? What would happen to the stolen artifacts? Harrison Mills handled them expertly while I stood back, content to be invisible again. But Gerald found me in the crowd, pulled me close, and held on as if he'd never let go. How? He whispered. How did you do it? I listened. I investigated, and I refused to believe the lies they wanted everyone to accept. I pulled back to look at him. They underestimated me because I'm old and polite. They thought I'd be easy to dismiss. They were wrong. Benjamin joined our embrace, this son who'd tried so hard to do the right thing and had been punished for it. I'm sorry I didn't tell you everything from the start, he said. I thought I was protecting you. I know, but I didn't need protection. I needed to be trusted. I smiled at him. We're family. We protect each other, but we also trust each other to be strong enough to handle the truth. Tom appeared at the edge of our group, hesitant and devastated. His wife was in jail. His carefully constructed life had collapsed. He looked like a man who'd lost his compass. Mom, His voice broke. I didn't know. About Diane, about any of it. I thought I was helping, thought I was saving the family. Come here. I held out my arm, and after a moment, he stepped into our family embrace. You made mistakes. You trusted the wrong person, but you're still my son. That hasn't changed. She used me, Tom said, his voice muffled against my shoulder. Used my connections, my firm's reputation, to get information she fed to Sawyer and Whitmore. I was so blind. You wanted to believe the best of your wife, Gerald said quietly. That's not a character flaw, son. But I didn't believe the best of you. Or Benjamin. Or Mom. Tom pulled back, wiping his eyes. I chose her over all of you. And she was the criminal the whole time. You chose what made sense to you in the moment, I said. You saw evidence and drew logical conclusions. You couldn't have known the evidence was manufactured. You knew. I suspected. And I had the advantage of knowing your father and brother better than anyone else. I knew in my bones they couldn't be thieves. I took his hand. But Tom, you need to understand something. Diane made her own choices. Her actions aren't your responsibility. You're a good man who was manipulated by someone you loved and trusted. That's not your fault. My firm will probably fire me. Then you'll find another position. You're talented and ethical, despite what's happened. I squeezed his hand. We'll get through this. Together. As a family. The next 2 weeks were a blur of interviews, depositions, and legal proceedings. The full scope of the conspiracy emerged piece by piece. Elizabeth Whitmore had been running similar schemes for years, moving from institution to institution, always staying one step ahead of suspicion. Richard Sawyer was actually Richard Brennan, a former art dealer who'd lost his license after being caught selling forgeries. Together, they'd orchestrated thefts at 4 different museums, always finding inside help, always framing innocent employees when necessary. Diane had been their newest recruit. She'd met Whitmore at a Chamber of Commerce event, recognized an opportunity for profit, and spent months feeding them information about our family, our property, and our vulnerabilities. She'd suggested using the tobacco barn as a hiding place, knowing Tom would eventually discover it and report it. She'd been the one to plant the artifacts in Gerald's truck, having made a copy of his keys months earlier. The betrayal ran deeper than any of us had imagined. She married me for access, Tom said one evening at the farm, nursing a glass of whiskey. To the family land, to connections, to respectability. I was just a useful tool. She married you 15 years ago. I pointed out gently. Long before this conspiracy existed. Whatever her crimes now, I think she did love you once. People change, sometimes for the worse. Does that make it better or worse? I don't know. But it means your marriage wasn't entirely a lie. It means your children have a mother who once was capable of love, even if she lost her way. I sat beside him on the porch, looking out over the land that had nearly cost us everything. Tom, you're going to have to decide what to tell your kids. How to help them understand why their mother made these choices. They're going to hate me. They're going to be confused and hurt and angry. But if you're honest with them, if you help them process their feelings, they'll survive this. Children are remarkably resilient. I put my arm around him. And you're going to survive too, even when it doesn't feel like it. Benjamin had the hardest road ahead. Though cleared of all charges, his reputation in the museum world had been damaged. Director Whitmore's accusations had spread through professional networks. Finding another position would take time and effort. But 3 weeks after the arrests, he received a call from the State Museum in Harrisburg. They needed a curator specializing in colonial American artifacts, someone with integrity and attention to detail, someone who'd proven they'd stand up for what was right, even at personal cost. They want me to start in January, Benjamin told us over dinner. Better salary than Whitmore, better opportunities. And they specifically said they were impressed by how I'd handled the investigation. What did you tell them? Gerald asked. I said yes. Benjamin grinned, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him in months. I also said I'd need to spend weekends helping my parents restore their farmhouse. Is that okay? More than okay, I said, my eyes stinging with happy tears. This house could use some young energy. I'm 28, Mom. Not exactly young. You're young to me. The artifacts were returned to the museum under new management. A special audit revealed that Whitmore and Sawyer had stolen over $3 million in items during their tenure, selling them to private collectors through encrypted networks. The investigation expanded to federal level, involving the FBI's art crime team. Jennifer Reeves, the young woman who'd risked her job to tell me what she'd overheard, was offered a position as assistant curator. She accepted, and Benjamin promised to mentor her when he could. She saved us, he said. Without her testimony, we'd never have known about the buyer meeting at the barn. She was brave, I agreed. But so were you. You saw something wrong and tried to fix it, even when it would have been easier to look away. I almost got Dad killed. No. You almost exposed criminals who would have continued stealing for years if you hadn't noticed those discrepancies. I met his eyes firmly. You did exactly what you were supposed to do. The fact that bad people tried to destroy you for it doesn't make your actions wrong. It makes their actions evil. December brought the first snow. Gerald and I stood on the porch, watching white flakes settle on the fields and woods, transforming the landscape into something clean and new. I keep thinking about the barn, Gerald said quietly, about hiding those artifacts there, keeping secrets from you. If I'd just trusted you from the start. We can't rewrite the past, I interrupted gently. We can only learn from it and do better going forward. You could have been killed if you'd confronted them directly, if they'd caught you recording them. But they didn't, because I was careful, strategic. I used the advantages I had. Age that made me invisible, politeness that made me seem harmless, intelligence that they never suspected. I took his hand. I'm not fragile, Gerald. I never was. You just forgot that somewhere along the way. He turned to face me fully. I'll never forget it again. Promise. Good. Tom visited more frequently now, bringing his children to spend weekends at the farm. His divorce from Diane was proceeding. Complicated by her criminal charges, but inevitable. The kids were struggling, seeing a therapist, asking questions Tom answered with painful honesty. Mommy made bad choices, he told them. She hurt people and took things that didn't belong to her. That doesn't mean she doesn't love you. It means she lost her way. Watching him parent through crisis, I saw strength I hadn't recognized before. Tom had always been the responsible one, the rule follower, the son who colored inside the lines. But real strength wasn't about following rules. It was about facing uncomfortable truths and growing from them. One Saturday afternoon, I found him in my library, the small room where I'd kept my favorite books for 40 years. "I've been reading about conspiracy cases," he said, gesturing to the volumes spread around him, "trying to understand how I missed the signs, how Diane manipulated me so completely. Because you loved her. Because you assumed the person you married was honest." I sat across from him. "Tom, you can't blame yourself for not suspecting your wife was a criminal. That's not a failing. That's being human." "You suspected?" "I suspected something was wrong with the museum investigation. I didn't suspect Diane until I saw her at the barn." I leaned forward. "And even then, I couldn't quite believe it. I understand the shock you're feeling. How do you trust anyone again after something like this?" "Carefully, thoughtfully. But you do trust again, because the alternative is living in fear and isolation." I smiled at him. "You'll heal. It takes time, but you will." Spring arrived, bringing new growth to the farm. Benjamin visited regularly, sometimes staying for long weekends, working on restoration projects with his father. The tobacco barn was torn down. None of us could look at it without remembering. In its place, we planted a garden. "For fresh starts," Benjamin said as we worked the soil together. 3 generations building something new from the ashes of what had been destroyed. Tom brought his children to help plant vegetables. The youngest asked if Grandma was a detective now. "No, sweetheart," I said, pulling her onto my lap. "I'm just someone who pays attention, who asks questions, who doesn't accept easy answers when the truth matters." "That sounds like a detective." "Maybe. But mostly it's just being curious and stubborn." Gerald laughed, and the sound was light, free of the weight he'd carried for months. "Your grandmother has always been stubborn. It's one of her best qualities. And one of my most annoying, according to you at various points in our marriage." I take it back. Stubbornness saved our family. That evening, after everyone had left and the house was quiet, I stood at my bedroom window looking out over the land. 42 years in this house. 42 years of marriage, motherhood, quiet days, and dramatic moments I'd never imagined would find their way to rural Pennsylvania. I was 63 years old. Society saw women my age as invisible, irrelevant, past their usefulness. People assumed we were fragile, needed protection, couldn't handle difficult truths. But I'd proven something important. To myself most of all. Age wasn't weakness. Experience wasn't obsolescence. Politeness wasn't the same as powerlessness. I'd fought for my family with nothing but intelligence, patience, and a stubborn refusal to accept injustice. I'd outsmarted criminals half my age. I'd stood my ground when everyone told me to surrender. And I'd won. Not through violence or wealth or legal tricks. Through careful observation, meticulous research, and the wisdom that comes from decades of living. Through understanding that the person everyone underestimates holds the greatest advantage. Gerald came to stand beside me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I'm exactly where I belong, with exactly who I belong with." I leaned back against him, and that I'm not done yet. Not with life, not with fighting for what matters, not with proving that women my age have more strength than anyone gives us credit for. The world should know better than to underestimate Anne Hartley. "Yes," I agreed, smiling at my reflection in the window. "It really should." The farmhouse settled around us, solid and enduring. Outside, the garden would grow. Inside, our family would heal. And I would face whatever came next with the same determination that had brought us through the darkness. Because I'd learned something invaluable through this ordeal. The greatest power isn't youth or beauty or physical strength. It's the intelligence that comes from experience, the patience that comes from age, and the courage to stand firm when everything tells you to give up. I was 63 years old, and I was just getting started. Now tell me, what would you have done if you were in my place? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to check out the video on your screen right now. I'm sure it will surprise you.